And we want to welcome everyone. This is the virtual Princeton Public Library. My name is Nora, and I'm a part of the program team here. We are so delighted to have this keynote capping off our third program with the Princeton University Concerts, our Beyond the Concert book discussion series. We have had two very, very exciting discussions of Stephen Hough's book, Rough Ideas. And we, of course, so privileged to have him with us here today to talk about Rough Ideas and further thoughts in advance of his upcoming performance with Princeton University Concerts in February. We will have this recording available for you following the presentation. We invite you throughout to go ahead and put in the chat any questions you may have. We will try to get to as many as we can. But please also just feel free to say hello. Let us know if you are a musician, a performer, what your background is. We always love to hear that. But I'm going to turn things over now to our co-presenters. We have Marna Seltzer and Dasha Koltuniuk here from Princeton University Concerts. And Marna, please feel free to take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Marna Seltzer. I'm the director of Princeton University Concerts, and I want to thank everybody so much for being here today. Tonight, a little bit for Stephen, I think, who is in a different time zone from us. I want to extend my gratitude to Nora and to the Princeton Public Library for collaborating with us on this series and for hosting us today. I want to thank my amazing colleague, Dasha Koltuniuk, who is going to host today's conversation. I want to thank Stephen Hough so much for taking time to join us here today, and to all of you who continue to support and participate in these events. Rough Ideas is a remarkable book that for me felt like a mirror, not only on the ethos of Princeton University Concerts, but also on my most deeply held convictions about music. It illuminates the intricate relationship between audiences and performer, the importance of concert space, which is something we think about a lot, the joy and sometimes the agony of performing and being someone who loves to go to concerts and loves music and everything in between. For me, it felt like encountering a beautifully articulated treatise on everything that I strive for in our work. So I am really, really looking forward to today's discussion. And I am also especially looking forward to welcoming Stephen Hough in person to Princeton in February when he will appear with the Takács String Quartet. As I just said to him, we have wanted to have him here for so long, and we've been eagerly awaiting for that. So thank you again, and I'm going to turn things over to Dr.
Thank you, Marna, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this conversation with Sir Stephen Hough. This conversation comes as the culmination of very spirited book group conversations earlier this month on his essay collection, as Marna just mentioned, as Stephen's also a prolific writer, an author of several books, a longtime contributor to the New York Times, The Guardian, The Telegraph, among many other publications. He is also a painter. He was almost a priest twice, I believe, which is all to say that this is a fascinating, deeply inspiring human being. And although I can spend many minutes of our precious time together listing his plethora of accolades, I urge you all to look up his impressive biography later so that we can make the most of our time with our esteemed guest. And so that we can begin by asking you, Stephen, how you might describe yourself. Would you primarily consider yourself a pianist, which, according to your book, to you necessarily means being a pianist composer, and writing and painting serve secondary roles, or has this identity shifted over the years?
Gosh, well, it's an interesting question. Hello, everyone, wherever you are, and it's wonderful, Dasha, to be talking to you. I think I did speak about this in the book, but I think it's poetry, really, because I think poetry. I think of this, and I've said this in various different forums, is like a furnace in the cellar, and the radiators in the room are playing the piano writing, composing. I have to say, you're very kind to mention painting, but it's really just I throw paint around the room and some of it lands on the canvas. It's very much a sort of hobby when I get time to do it, and I haven't done so for many years. But the other things are equally serious to me. My bank manager likes me to play the piano. Not so happy when I'm composing or writing, but um, they're very personal to me, of course, because they're directly creative. So I put myself on the page in a very vulnerable way, I think, when I compose or when I write words. And so I would say those three things, yeah, they're equally important to me in different ways.
And so then have you struggled with which of these talents to prioritize at times, or has it just always been a priority to create a life in which you could pursue all of them equally?
Well, I think there are certain deadlines that are imposed upon us. I am going on Monday to Spain to play the Grieg concerto on the north coast of Spain, and that is a priority to be ready for those concerts. I have to walk out from the stage at 8 p.m., sit at the piano, and play that first A minor chord. So that's a very real thing that has to be done. If I'm writing a book or writing music, I tend to begin very much in advance of any deadline there. So if you ask me to write you a clarinet sonata, I want to begin a year before even the possible first date when you might want to see a draft of that piece. So I'm very much in advance there. So I work into that schedule enough flexible time so I can leave it maybe for a month without touching it and then still not be late.
And it's remarkable, and I think uh, demands a lot of organizational prowess. But in terms of how people have perceived that, have you found it challenging or problematic to create a professional identity that encompasses all that you want to do? Have you perhaps encountered any pushback?
Well, I haven't really self-consciously tried to create an identity with this. I started playing the piano professionally after winning the Naumburg competition, and it was a big surprise because I was 21. I'd just begun my doctorate at Juilliard, and I entered on a whim this competition without any expectation or even desire to win. I was just having fun with friends in the cafeteria of Juilliard, and we were hanging out, and I was going to nightclubs and smoking in the corridors in those days.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I won, and suddenly I had to grow up overnight. So that was the beginning of all of that. And I then needed to have a manager, I needed a tax accountant and a social security number. All of those practical things about being an adult came into place. So that was a time when I really I couldn't think about writing music or writing more. There just wasn't time. I was racing around, I was crossing the Atlantic, sometimes a couple of times a month, and there wasn't time. But gradually, because I'd always written music from being very young, and indeed words, English was always my favorite subject at school. I started doing that again. My composition teacher died, and I was asked to write a piece for his memorial service. And so I wrote a little piece for that. And then someone heard that and said, "Oh, I liked it. Would I write him a piece?" And so it sort of snowballed. And this was now probably in the mid 90s, I suppose, maybe 1994.
Mm.
And it's been going on since. I wrote a carol which was sung at Westminster Cathedral, and they asked if I would write them a mass. And then I wrote another mass that was done at Westminster Abbey, and they wanted something else. And so I very luckily gone on from there. So I've pretty much only written pieces that I was commissioned to write in the last 20 years. I'm just finished. I just finished a flute piece for the principal flute of the Sydney Symphony.
Mm.
That went off to the publisher for sort of formatting, and then I've written a two-piano piece for a festival in London, and my piano concerto, the recording of that is being released in a few weeks. We recorded that in concert last year. So yeah, it's been busy with writing. So and it fills me with great joy because I find that when I write words, it inspires me to play the piano, and when I play the piano, it inspires me to write music. So the whole thing, these radiators are often, some of them are turned a little bit lower at times, but they're all ready to fire up when the opportunity arises.
I mean, it's you come through in all of those forms so clearly, and the in the relationship between all these things is just so sincere and inspiring. And you mentioned the Naumburg competition, and I actually wanted to ask you about that because it really was this moment that seemed like it just happened completely by chance and almost didn't happen. And if you've thought about, and perhaps in fact for the people who haven't read the story, if you could like say a little bit more about that moment, and if you've thought about how your life would have been different had you not decided to submit that audition tape or not had someone vouch for you going in.
It's the fascinating thing for all of us, isn't it? What if I hadn't met this person, or indeed, without the Second World War, my parents wouldn't have met because my mother was evacuated to Wales from Liverpool, where she met my father. And so we all live in this amazing tapestry of threads which might have gone in a different direction. And the whole world, of course, could have been different if, I don't know, Mr. Hitler hadn't met Mrs. Hitler, and there was, and not just the big things like that, but all those small little encounters and which university we decide to go to and so on. But basically, yeah, with this, the first rounds of the Naumburg took place within the Juilliard building. And I saw a notice on the notice board and I thought, oh, well, I'll be here anyway. So this looks kind of fun. And I play this repertoire. Let me enter this. So I entered it and I really didn't think anything of it. I didn't do any particular preparation. And I got through the first round. Oh, yes, I submitted the audition tape, a very bad tape. I don't think the playing was bad, but the quality was very bad because I recorded it on a cassette player from someone else's cassette player. So I just held it in the air while we recorded because I didn't have one of these leads that would do a direct record. And so at the end of it, I forgot it was still running and we were talking. And so it was a very amateur job and it went in and it was actually rejected. But Joseph Bloch, who taught piano lit at Juilliard, had written me a letter of recommendation. And apparently, I never saw this letter, but it was really over the top. And so the organizer of the festival, Lucy Mann, looked at this letter and she phoned Joseph Bloch and said, well, you said all these lovely things, but he's actually been rejected. What, I don't quite get this. And so he said, let him into the first round and hear him live and then see what you think. So I suppose that was, well, not illegal, but slightly unethical perhaps. But I was the beneficiary of that. So I did get into the first round and then I progressed through these rounds until I was in the finals on the main stage of Carnegie Hall. And I have to say, that's when it really hit me. Suddenly I thought, my goodness, what am I doing here? I had no idea this was going to lead to this. And in fact, I was so amused in a way by the whole thing. I think I relaxed and I played my best. And then, the announcement was made and then I'd won the first prize. And so, yeah, it was a tremendous moment. And who knows how things would have turned out if that hadn't been the case. Well, I probably would have continued doing my doctorate because I loved living in New York. It was the first time I'd really lived away from home properly, and I was having a lot of fun, a wonderful time. So I would have stayed in the States and maybe entered another competition later. But, who knows how these things work out.
Well, I was fascinated by the way you described being amused and almost detached. I think in the essay you almost forgot to go to one of the rounds because it wasn't sort of top of mind at the moment. And I just wondered if that kind of approach might have helped you play your best and win the whole thing.
Oh, definitely. I mean, isn't this true for all of us? If we worry about something, so often we don't do it as well as we could.
Mm.
Even if it's giving a speech or something, or even if it's doing an interview like this, if the more we're worried, the more self-conscious we become. If we can just let go, but it's a very easy if, isn't it? And maybe it's at the end of your life when you finally don't care what anyone thinks about you, that you finally can be yourself. Well, perhaps there's a way to learn that lesson a little earlier on so you could enjoy some years of not caring as much. I have to say, I'm older than anyone on this whole Zoom call, I think. And it does get it is nice when you get a little older and care a little less. I think when you're in your 20s, everything seems so important. And you're in that period when you're at university or college, and you're always sitting exams, and then you're going for job interviews, and it's everything is this stress of trying to impress people. And gradually, when you get to a certain age, it becomes less important, really. And then when
Mm.
you get to my mother's older age, she was just rude to everyone because she really didn't care what anyone thought. I don't advise we go that far, but maybe there's a sort of middle ground.
No, I mean that's so thoughtful. And one of the many things that I so admire about your playing is this tremendous and very direct thoughtfulness. It's, with every note, it's as if you ask and answer the question, why? And I think this relates to this very compelling request that you have for your audience, that you say that classical music audiences must be active, not passive listeners. And that reminded me of Vladimir Nabokov's essay on good writers and good readers. And if I may, I'll quote a little part. He says, quote, "We should always remember that the work of art is invariably the creation of a new world, so that the first thing we should do is to study that new world as closely as possible, approaching it as something brand new, having no obvious connection with the worlds we already know," unquote.
Hmm.
So I just love to hear a little bit more about what you expect from your listeners, or maybe it's better to say what you recommend to your listeners.
Yeah, well, I was recently asked to write the preface for a book of essays by an Italian priest who died, oh, I guess about 15 years ago, Luigi Giussani. Um, and I knew the name, but I hadn't read any of his writings. And so I said I'd love to take a look at them, and I took a look at them. And there's a wonderful quote that he has there about his work as a priest generally, and it's let us go together. And he would say this idea, he worked a lot with university students and people in high school. Let's go together. And I thought, well, what a wonderful way to think about playing a concert. When I begin to play, let's go on this journey together with Beethoven or Chopin or whoever it might be. Um, I can't go alone. If there's no one in the audience, there's no point in me playing the concert, really. I think it is a very important part of concert life. It's communication. But as you said before, not just one way. I hate the idea of me being a preacher or sort of telling you what to do or what to think. I think we want to experience this music together. And I certainly feel when an audience is really intensely listening, I feel I'm actually nourished by that. I'm getting something back from that. And I think it's true from a conversation, isn't it? Even just going for dinner with someone. If you have someone who's always checking their phone and not really listening to you, then it's hard to feel that you can really be at your best or have a wonderful sense of communication. But if you have someone who's listening and who's contributing and giving you back energy, then it becomes this wonderful time of grace, really, a wonderful time of lifting each other up and of amusing each other and sympathizing with each other. And it's a very human thing. So I think giving a concert should be a deeply human thing. And that's why live concerts still matter. We can listen to recordings on our own. We can have headphones in. Nobody else needs to be in the room. But in a concert, we're all there together. So I was just in Spain, actually, this last week. I was playing a recital in Madrid, and we had quite a noisy audience. There's a lot of coughing. Apparently, there's been some bugs going around, and of course, instantly, it's a little bit annoying because you're trying to create a very soft sound. But then I did actually think, well, there's something very human about this because these are people, and I've certainly had to suppress coughs in concerts before. So, I thought, no, it's the point here is not to stop and turn around and say, could you please be quiet? The point is that this is part of what a concert is. A concert is not an ideal situation. A concert is full of compromise, of the differences of the people there. Some people are very into it. Other people are bored. Someone told me that they were sitting next to someone who fell asleep. Well, actually, I've fallen asleep at concerts too. Don't tell anyone about it. Or certainly at an opera at the end of a long day, and the lights go down, and one and a glass of wine. It's a little bit difficult sometimes too. But no, I thought this is very human, and so I think this concert experience is something we need to treasure, and not telling people off for applauding in the wrong place, or for coughing. Of course, it's good to suppress a cough. You don't want someone to be openly hacking away, and even for health reasons, that's true. But on the other hand, it's part of the rich fabric of our human lives, and so I almost grew to like these coughs. I thought, yeah, these are people like me.
Absolutely. And it's quite striking that I think audiences often forget that it is a two-way street. I'm just remembering another musician told me once that they looked over and the person in the front row decided to take off their shoe and closely examine it in the middle of a performance. Um, and that you as a musician are as affected by their behavior and their focus and their energy as they are by the magic that you create on stage. But that makes me recall the moment you wrote about when you were kicked out of a concert at Juilliard after you and your friends had an uncontrollable case of the giggles. So,
Yeah.
um, have you experienced memorable audience behavior at your own concerts?
Well, no one, as far as I know, has had to leave because of giggles. No, that was a pretty shameful occasion, but there we are. We all do things when we're students that we regret.
Human, as you say, human.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I had someone choking during a concert, which was quite alarming. I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but I found out later that's what was happening. It was behind me. It was actually with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and I heard this person sort of obviously having a terrible sort of distress, sounding like he's either having a heart attack or whatever else. But it was a cough suite or something like this, and it was dealt with, and then he was completely fine. But it was a worrying time then. So yeah, occasionally those things can happen, but not so far anything worse than that.
Good. Um, and then I guess there's also the issue of audience backstage in that very delicate moment after you finish the concert. And you've written about the typical interactions that you have in which people offer, as you say, diplomatic words of phrase, which are embarrassingly fulsome or politely restrained or mysteriously mendacious. So I would love to know what your ideal interaction might be backstage and what advice you have for eager fans who are meeting you post-concert.
Well, I'm always thrilled to meet people after a concert. And actually, I was just in China last month, and it's astonishing how many young people want to meet you afterwards. So that we had each time a signing in the lobby, and we were there over an hour meeting people, and they all wanted selfies, and they all wanted autographs, and I was very happy with this. I love meeting people. And you presume if someone that you don't know comes backstage to see you that they've liked the concert. It would be very unusual for someone to come back to tell you that they hated what they just heard. Normally, then they would just go off home. Um, I suppose the tricky thing is friends who didn't like it and what they say, or if you go backstage to a colleague and you, but I think we all accept the little white lies that nobody really wants to know what you think immediately after a concert. It may be a week later that someone approaches you and says, actually, I wasn't so sure about how I'm playing Brahms. What did you think? And then perhaps you can gently be honest about it, but not right afterwards. All you want after a concert is a hug and, you know, and just a nice sort of exchange of pleasantries, I think.
Makes sense. Um, Another aspect that's often hidden in concert going consciousness is the role of the concert hall as a space in which to make music. And I loved that you opened your book describing the concert hall as an instrument in and of itself. So can you say a little bit more about that? When did you first begin to notice it as such? What are the differences between playing in a large venue like Carnegie versus a smaller venue like Wigmore? Um,
Yeah, well, the piano is a very dry instrument. It has surprisingly, because it's the biggest instrument on the stage usually, except for the organ perhaps. And it is powerful, but it has a power which immediately dies, of course, because the hammer strikes the string and then the sound is dying instantly. And in fact, in about 5 seconds, it's disappeared altogether. So you rely on the acoustics of the hall to support that sound. So in a hall with a nice warm acoustic, it's completely an extension of the instrument. Without that, it's very hard. You feel a bit like a day when your voice isn't working very well. If the whole is rich and gives you back some sound, then it's like your voice is in great shape. If it's a dry lecture theatre type of sound, it's like you hear yourself and you think, I don't like what I'm hearing. And that's what happens when you play in a bad acoustic. And if you don't like what you're hearing, it's very hard then to keep playing and to have the confidence to go on and the inspiration, because I'm very inspired by just the sound of the piano. I think the piano is a beautiful instrument still. The honeymoon with my instrument has not ended yet, and it's been more than 50 years since I started learning it. But I I need to have that sound to be what I'm expecting it to be. So when I play even just a C major chord, I want it to ring. I don't want it just to go flat, which is what happens in a dry acoustic. But the other side of it, of course, between the big and the small hall, sometimes this affects things such as tempo. There are things that can sound scrambled in a big hall because there just isn't the time for the sound to register with the listeners, particularly those further back in the hall. And then with a hall like Wigmore Hall, it can just be too loud. It can be too relentless. If someone's playing, a very sort of aggressive piece, you've got to temper that very carefully because it can actually be an assault on the ear.
So then if you could design your own concert hall, what would you prioritize in it? Is it that sound, that inspiring sound?
Yes, I think there are all sorts of things involved, though. I think lighting is very important in a concert hall. We often forget this is not just an aural art form. There's a visual to it as well. Again, if you just want to hear music, then you can stay at home and listen on your phone, on your headphones. But if you go to a concert, I think it's very important that the lights go down before the musician comes out. And I think all of these things are important. So, in fact, we worked a little bit on this in Spain. We were rushed because there was an orchestra rehearsal that ran over. And so we didn't have much time to do lighting. But, if in a solo piano recital on a big stage, the whole stage is just lit across like it's an orchestra, it doesn't have the same drama. It doesn't have the same focus. But if that light can be shrunk so that it's just a pool of light with the piano, before you've even started to play, you've created the right atmosphere. And I think this is very important. Again, we are creatures of ritual in all sorts of things, whether it's shaking hands with people or smiling or the way we eat. All of these things, we build rituals around them because we want to create an occasion for something. And I think this is something that we're in danger sometimes of losing in the modern world. The occasions, say, of sitting down to eat dinner, because now very often there's a television playing or someone gets up and down and they're eating and standing up, and then the phones, and they wanted all of this. I think there was a time when you all sat down at the table and it was a ritual, it was an event. And I think this is something that's true of the concert. So I'm all for experimenting with different kinds of concerts, and I'm not pompous or snobbish about this. I think it's great to have concerts in car parks, and all sorts of different venues have concerts at midnight, whenever it is, casual clothes, yes, all of this. But I think we shouldn't forget that the traditional concert form still has a lot of life in it. And to me, I still am very thrilled to put on some clothes and go out and sit down at 8 o'clock and actually listen to a concert for a certain amount of time. I think there's still a magic to that. It's the magic of the theater.
Absolutely agree. And I think part of that ritual is silence as well. And I loved finding an essay you wrote in response to if you could rule the world. And
Oh,
it made me smile to read that one of the things you do is instate 15 minutes of communal silence to begin each school and office day. And One of our offerings in Princeton is a live music meditation series in which musicians on our series play as people meditate, and that has completely transformed the way that I experience music. It just allows for much less judgmental and much more thoughtful listening, and it's also one of the only settings I've encountered in which people are comfortable with silence. You mentioned, coughing earlier. It seems like the more there's silence in a slow movement, perhaps the more people want to cough. I've wondered if it's because there's this discomfort with silence. Um,
A
so
very good point. Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. And well, it makes us vulnerable, doesn't it? You know, if we're speaking and filling the space with noise, we don't have to face certain things about ourselves or about other people. I wonder if, well, let's 15 minutes is quite a long time, but what about if every political meeting, even from the small local things right to the national politics, could begin with, well, let's even say 2 minutes of silence. I think already actually it gives people a chance to calm down sometimes. You know, it's not good to enter difficult discussions if everyone's agitated.
and this ubiquity of sound all the time, I guess would it be safe to say that if you could rule the world, there would be actually less music, not more?
Very possibly, very possibly. Although I think I might have said, I haven't read these essays for a long time, but I don't like making more rules than I need to. I think one should have as few rules as possible in life. But yes, a suggestion I think would be to have a little bit less. I think the background music, the fact that one's always got to have it, um, is really is unfortunate that it has to be, particularly in restaurants. It's wonderful when you're at a restaurant. Uh, and either if I'm on my own and reading or if I'm with somebody else and talking, that the music is either very, very low or that it's not there at all. And again, I think it's an embarrassment, really. Sometimes hotel managers and restaurant managers feel that if there isn't any music there, people will feel discomfort and embarrassment and so on.
I wonder if part of it also is that just we as a civilization have this innate desire for creating, inventing, consuming, more and more and more and more. And I wonder if, isn't that partly what drives you as an artist? Because you made this analogy to Roger Federer during training, making strokes that are, quote, winners, but none of them good enough, end quote. So do you ever reach a point where you feel something is good enough, whether as a pianist, composer, writer? And are those perhaps those categories different?
I think you have to learn to let go. I think there's a kind of perfectionism which is very damaging, where you've never happy enough with what you've done. And I think it's a very interesting balance because, yeah, you need to. I think I also quoted one of my teachers about being a perfectionist in practice and a realist in
I
performance.
love that.
Um, you know, you won't get very far if the perfectionism is towering over you every moment of your performance. You have to let go, and also you have to realize what is the perfection. Fortunately, you know, with playing, we're not playing tennis. There's no such thing as absolute accuracy as there is with sport, where you're either in the court or you're out of the court. Music is never quite that simple. And sometimes inaccuracies actually can be very endearing. Um, and if things are too clean and too perfect, they can lack drama, they can lack interest. So I think, yeah, I am a bit of a perfectionist in that I'm very hard on myself when I am working, and I keep going over and over things, and I never let things go to chance. But then you have to let go. You just
Mm.
have to go out on that journey and just do it.
Mm. And that act of letting go also seems to be at that interesting tension between um, preservation and innovation. And what I mean by that is you wrote about how the templates of the classical era are now in museums. The works they help produce are, thank goodness, alive and well, but simply to use their patterns today unadapted would be to produce mere replicas. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I have to admit that I couldn't agree more with pretty much everything that you wrote in Rough Ideas. And this is a beautiful answer to a question my husband, who's a composer, was once asked at a dinner party, which is, why don't contemporary composers just continue to write more music in the style of, of say Mozart, because that's so beautiful. Why not just keep doing that? But on the other hand, do you think that change for the sake of change in writing new music is productive?
Well, I think the 20th century threw up so many questions about life in every single department. I mean, it's amazing that any of us are sane after living through, or our parents and grandparents living through what they did from, I guess let's take a date at the beginning of the First World War until the present day. I mean, it's sort of 100 years of wonderful things and yet terrible things and chaos and ideas flying around. I do think that in this century, we've been able to pull some of these together, particularly if we're just talking about composing. I think there was a time when one felt one had to be self-consciously original with every single thing one wrote. And a lot of composers wrote music that they didn't love, or they didn't write music that they wanted to write because they felt it was old-fashioned. And I think now we really are at a point where we can write what we want to write, and we can paint what we want to paint and wear the clothes we want to wear. Again, you're too young for this, but I do remember in the 1970s, there was a real tyranny of fashion. You simply couldn't wear a wide collar when a narrow collar was in fashion, and then the next year it was a wide collar. And it was pretty strict. And if you didn't write music with the 12-tone system for many years, you wouldn't get into a university on a composition degree. You wouldn't get commissioned. You wouldn't get performed. It was very, very rigid, and it started to fall apart really in the 1980s. And then gradually until the present day, it's become much more free. So if you want to write a traditional Victorian type novel now, that's 800 pages long with a plot, you can do it. And it's not a matter, to go back to your husband's dinner table guess, it's not a matter of copying Mozart, but there might be a way in which beginning with something that is close to that style could be a way for you to start to write your own original piece. Of course, we got this with the neoclassicists. And sometimes I think composers will use something from the Renaissance. Will take a chorale from a sort of Baroque period and work around that. And I think the same is true with visual artists now. In fact, beginning really with the 1960s, which is my background here, Roy Lichtenstein, that was quite, the pop artists were quite revolutionary at that time, because they started to use representation again, and started to use everyday things. Obviously, Andy Warhol was the key figure in that, but many of those artists, and they started to break down the rigidity, really. The minimalists were the same. You think of Philip Glass and Steve Reich and those people, John Adams. They started to go back to what they wanted to write and say, well, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with tonality. It's not automatically unoriginal if you've heard something like it before.
And I guess I always wondered if there was almost a tradition of writing music for musicians only, right? It's writing systems that only other musicians can understand and perhaps admire. And now there's a shift back to writing more for other people, whether or not they understand that you're, writing a 12-tone system or not.
Yeah, there's a danger though that it can be simplistic. I think we spoke about a concert as a theater type of experience, and I think all of us, even if you enjoy soap operas, you want something a little bit more. You want to be challenged. You want to leave a concert or leave a theater or a cinema with something to think about, I think, or to be changed a little bit, or to feel that the memory of that movie will stay with you. And those are the great movies, the great concerts, the great theatre, the great books. So there's a place for an airport novel, but it's got to be a little bit more than that. So there's a danger, I think, today that one might just write for an audience to find it attractive instantly and not be challenged beyond that.
Mm.
So I'm happy that we can still have composers writing more complex music. But I just think that we should feel honest about it and write the music that we want to hear. We want to hear ourselves. I think that's in a way that for me, the final thing. Don't write music that you think other people want. Write the music you want to write.
Yeah. And I guess with the music you're writing or experiencing being connected to the times you're living in, you did write about leaving politics out of concerts, which is perhaps a reaction to a trend that has become more common among musicians in recent years. In fact, we have a whole series dedicated to it on our season this year. But if I may quote this beautiful phrase you wrote, quote, "When I walk onto the stage, I want to be friends with my audience. If I speak to them, I will be affirmed by some and rejected by others, and a wedge that cannot be removed will have been created," end quote. And yet, in an earlier essay, you also make the case for the arts being vital in periods of economic difficulty or social strife, because you say they don't just help us to cope, they call into question the way we live our lives. So I wonder if you believe in any sort of middle ground, perhaps that might harness that sense of connection, friendship, unity, um, after a concert for any sort of betterment of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I also respect very much colleagues who do want to say do political things. I mean, I'm not, I just feel that's not what I am comfortable doing. Um, I'm, Richter, Sviatoslav Richter, the great Russian pianist, was asked once, "Do you teach?" And he said, "Well, no. What if I were wrong?" And goodness, he would have made an incredible teacher and would have been extraordinary. But I feel that a little bit about. I mean, there's almost every political system and idea um, has some truth in it and something that's not true, or it's relevant in a certain time, but maybe a decade later it doesn't seem so important, or it seems wrong-headed, or all kinds of things like that. And I just feel people have not come to a concert to hear my half-baked ideas about political issues. And I have to say, some of my colleagues, I think, do have a rather naive understanding of some of the big issues that we face. And so I feel that if we can keep as many people in the hall listening to music and friends, the better. There may be a time, maybe there's a time when I want to write something very much more political or have a particular discussion about an issue. But I think the concert for me is not the time to do that, really. But all music is human, and all politics only exists to try and make sense of ordering human life. I wish our politicians, in a sense, were grayer and less interesting, because I sort of want them to have schools that work and hospitals that work and roads that are paved, and then I want to forget about them and get on with other things. But that's something that in the modern world is very difficult to do. So I think I'm very happy that in my life I have the arts as a refuge, really. I hope it's not escapism, but sometimes escapism is important. And I think, if you were in Auschwitz, the music that you heard would be a consolation in a time of absolute horror. So maybe that's an example of when music as escapism is not a bad thing. When there's been quite a bit of study recently about how music can help people with Alzheimer's and in situations. There again, music is a form of escapism. There, it's a form of healing. I think that's fine. I think it's may that research last, and maybe we find more and more to do that. I visited a prison a couple of months ago. to talk about music and so on. And it was a fascinating time. And I was really very touched by them telling me the sort of music that they liked. Actually, most of it was really the heaviest kind of acid rock, but it was great talking to these guys. They were all very serious prisoners. I mean, they were probably not going to leave the prison. But I was really humbled and touched by the exchanges that we had, and I'm hoping I can go back again because it was a very moving experience for me. But for them, music actually helped them to cope with what they deal with, knowing that they'll never leave these these walls. And so they would listen to music in their cells. In fact, one of them, they were joking about it because he used to play his music very loud late at night. And they were saying, we try to stop him because he's keeping all of us awake. And I thought, this is wonderful that there's a sort of humor as well in the way that we listen to music and in the way that we respond to it. So yeah, it was a very special occasion. So I think music has so many. It's something for us to experience and use in so many different ways.
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a very fierce debate in our book club after reading your book about whether music was escapist and whether escapism was a good or a bad thing. If music is relaxing, is that a bad thing? And there were very impassioned speeches on the subject. And so I should turn over to the members of our book club and others who have joined us to make sure that you all who are on the call can ask your questions. You can type them into the chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom. And as you do, some of our book club members have pre-submitted questions. And the first was, in response to your essay about the concert hall being like a museum, uh, this participant remarked that she can easily define visual art as shape, line, and color, and she wondered what for you is the equivalent in music and how you might define those terms.
Yeah, well, it is different, of course, because we can only experience music in time. Um, with a painting, we can stand in front of it for 2 seconds or for 2 hours. We choose how we respond to that. But if you're listening to a Beethoven string quartet, uh, well, I guess if you're listening on your speakers, you can pause and go back and listen again. But basically, listening to that requires the experience of hearing it in time. Um, and if I don't want to be morbid about it, but you're closer to death at the end of your string quartet than you were when it started. It actually is you've given some of your breathing time on this planet to listen to that work. And in a way, the musician has that control over you. Of course, you can leave the concert hall, but basically, you're pretty much there. And so I think that's quite a responsibility for me as a musician, because you've given me your time, and so I better be worthy of it.
Wow. Uh,
Sorry to.
no, I thank you. No, nothing to apologize for. I've been chewing on that for a long time. Um, when was the first time that you truly felt that the power of music, either as a performer or as a listener?
Well, I think as soon as I started learning the piano, well, probably the first music that I heard, which was popular music. We had no classical music in my home when I was a boy, but then eventually I started to listen to. Once I started piano lessons, my father started buying records, and I was listening. And I've always found music to have this very emotional connection, and I think that's with writing music and the music that I love. I do want to have that emotional connection. I respect music that has mainly an intellectual interest, but I quite like having tears in my eyes when I listen to things, or when I go to a movie or read a book. I want to have that experience. And in fact, I just had that experience with a book on the plane just coming back from Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to reread Willa Cather's late novel Lucy Gayheart, which is a very musical book. Um, and there's something so, I've written about it, of course, in this book, but there's something so honest and human and simple in a way, with great art about her writing. And I thought, this book is a miracle for that. She's talking a lot about Schubert in it, and I think she actually gives you in words what Schubert gives you in music. Is this happy? Is this sad? Am I crying? Am I laughing? And the tender moments of this girl from a small town in Nebraska going to the big city of Chicago and meeting this great leader singer and accompanying him and having her soul change through the music and through him. And yet it's discomforting because then she goes back home, and how does she share this experience of these great Schubert songs with the simple members of her family? And it's done so beautifully because, of course, there's no looking down on the people who haven't yet experienced that music. But on the other hand, once you've been led into this world of great music, it is very hard not to want to share that with other people, or to feel frustrated that other people don't share the same musical values as you. I'm sorry, I've been rambling a little bit from
No,
that question.
not at all. I absolutely, I think, and that's part of what makes it incredible is that yes, you're having a very individual response to music, but it's also always a communal one at the same time. And
Yeah.
it's impossible for anything else. This one person who joined us today asks for your thoughts on how music bypasses conscious thought and generates instant emotional feelings.
I'm not sure any of us knows. I mean, there are certain things of physics. Apparently, a major chord and a minor chord trigger different things in the brain, which you can actually measure. And certainly, a discord will produce what's a bit like a wince in the brain. And the brain is very happy with a C major chord because that is the harmonic series that is there in nature. So there are actually factual, absolute, tangible things which music does. But how a Schubert piece makes us feel as we do, I don't think we know. But actually, I'm not even sure I want to know. I quite like the mystery and the magic of that.
Mhm. And then our intern actually just sent in a question saying that both painting and musical composition begin with a blank white canvas. What are the similarities or differences between the way that you conceive of a blank slate in music or in painting? How does this inform the way that you begin a new painting or musical work?
Well, I suppose they are similar, but if it's you painting, it's really a blank canvas. Whereas if it's you playing a piece, of course, the canvas is already laid out, but you have to bring it to life. So that's a slightly different thing with playing. Yes, with writing, we've all faced the blank page, sometimes with a certain horror if we've had to write something and don't know when to begin. Um, but I feel even when I'm playing a concert, this idea of the blank canvas very important. I want to go out into the stage, and particularly in a recital when it's just me on my own, and create something from nothing. If we go back to that let's go together. Yes, I've mapped out the journey that we're going to go on, but on the other hand, I don't want to have mapped out exactly every milepost along the way because actually no journey is ever the same twice. And if we're walking along the road, we're going to find that there's a bird singing in one particular part one day, perhaps, or there's an old Coke can on the floor as we're walking along. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways in which that journey can be different. So I think this is a very important part for the recreative artist, never to feel that you know exactly what's going to happen. It's never routine. And I think I mentioned this in the book too, that actors are so inspiring to me because they come out every night, much more than we do because it's in the same venue. Sometimes for 6 months or a year, they can be doing the same show. How is it that they can be fresh and on fire every single night? And that's what it is being a great actor. There are some people who could do it a few times, but to do it 6 months every single time or twice in a day, those are the great ones. And I think that's what we as performing musicians aspire to as well.
Hmm. Well, we very much await your doing just that on our stage in a few weeks. And for a final question, Can you just tell us a bit about the string quartet that you wrote for the Takács Quartet that will be performed and your relationship with the Takács Quartet?
Yes, well, I've played with the Takács Quartet for many years. We made a recording, I guess, about 20 years ago of the Brahms Quintet, which, in fact, we're going to be playing for you. Although the members are slightly different. I think there are two different members now than there were when we made that record. But the piece I wrote for them, they were recording the Duthier and Ravel string quartets, and they wanted a third piece to go with them. So they asked if I'd be interested to write something. And it was pretty daunting because, you know, the Duthier and the Ravel are maybe the two greatest string quartets of the 20th century, certainly the greatest French quartets of the 20th century. And here I was asked to write something else. So, but yeah, maybe if I'd been 20, I would have been overwhelmed by that. But I thought, okay, let's go with this. So what are we going to do? And I wanted to have some kind of a French theme, and indeed a Parisian theme, because both those composers were working out of Paris. And so I looked at these. So the Ravel is from 1913, the Duthier is from the 1970s. So what was in the middle between those two dates? And it was really the world of Les Six, those six composers of the interwar period, 1920s Paris. Jazz had come to town. There was that whole neoclassic movement as well that was growing out of a rejection of the 19th century aesthetic that people felt in the 1920s had led to this imperialist war in 1418. So I wanted to play with those composers, with the ideas, with the flavor, with the scent, with the Chanel number 5. It was all happening in Paris at that time. So this piece is called Les Six Rencontres. It's a little bit of a pun on Les Six, the composers, but the 6 encounters. And what I did was I took 6 places that you might meet someone in Paris. So we have the boulevard, we have the park, we have the cinema, the theater rather, we have the church, we have the market, these different places. And so those are the atmospheres around which I built them. And I think the figure of Poulenc particularly is hovering over this. He's a composer that I really love. So there are some moments that I think you might hear a little bit of an influence of Poulenc, and indeed of Stravinsky, because he was also in Paris at that time as a kind of godfather, if you like, to Les Six. So that's roughly, there are 6 movements. That's roughly what the piece is, the inspiration behind it.
Oh, that's fascinating. And we absolutely can't wait to hear this piece, to hear you when you come to Princeton with the Takács Quartet on February 20th. To anyone who doesn't yet have a ticket for this concert, we have only 3 seats remaining.
Oh my goodness.
For available for purchase by phone only. Although turnbacks do sometimes become available closer to the concert day, and I hope one of my colleagues can put a link to our website in the chat for more information. But Stephen, I'm glad that this is not a goodbye, but a see you soon, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Dash. It's really been a pleasure. And goodbye, everyone. See you very soon.
Happy New Year to y'all.
Happy New Year.